Hello, everybody. Welcome to Intro to APIs using React. I am Tiffany Webb. I am your behind the scenes host. I am not a technical person, so please bear with me. That's what we have Matthew here for. He is one of our lead cohort leads. Instructors here at Flatiron School, and he will be teaching you everything you need to know about how to start off with APIs using React. We will definitely be emailing this out and recording it within 48 hours. So look in your email, your inbox is in the next day or so, and it should be there. And let's get this party started. Matthew, the audience is yours.
Sweet. Thanks, Tiffany. So yeah, hey you guys. Today we're gonna learn how to pull information from what's called an API, which is basically this way of serving information so that it's accessible to developers for development use. The APIs are mainly used for developers to use them to build stuff. So this is kind of using one of the APIs that I originally found when I was in Flatiron School myself for my first project. And I have, so I'll start sharing my screen now. And here is the file structure and how it will look. So this is my backend. So when it comes to web development, you can break it into two different roles where you have backend development and front-end development. We're mainly going to be doing front-end development today. That's because I've already created a backend that will serve this information to us. And I'm using this link right here. If I visit this link in the browser, so come to another tab or something and just paste this link into the browser, which I did before, but it has those quotation marks, so it didn't work. So let's try it again without the quotation marks. And you see, this is what gets pulled up. This is just a whole bunch of data, basically. And there are APIs for many different uses. If I go to this website called Any API, it'll show like a whole bunch of APIs that you can use. So I'm currently working with a project with the Spotify API. I've used the Instagram and Google APIs before. So basically, these companies make their data available to developers to use for whatever reason they want. So I can log into, so if you've ever been on the web and you've seen someone, a site allow you to log in with Instagram, they're using Instagram's API to allow you to log in with their credentials. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing, except we're not going to be logging in or anything. We're just going to be using the info that's in this tab. We're going to take this tarot card info, which is what this is. If you guys are familiar with tarot cards, it's sort of like this divination tool that you use to, it's sort of like, sort of like astrology, except with more like cards and pictures. This is where the original deck of cards came from. So they've been around for a long time. And this is just the standard deck, which contains, I think, like 70 some more cards. And we will basically use these cards to create an application where we can see a daily card, where the card of the day, which has some sort of like inspirational description or something. And then the different suits in the tarot mean different things. And yeah, I won't go too deep into that, but we're basically making an application in a language called React that will allow us to navigate through these cards in a more intelligible way, something that looks a little bit better than this. So that's kind of what we're doing in a nutshell, and I will get started. So right here, you see I have a front end that I built with JavaScript. And by front end, I mean that this is what the person who's visiting the site, this is what's handling what they see. So this contains an HTML file, and HTML is how we communicate over the web. This is how we display pages in the web using HTML. So this is a JavaScript front end I made. React is a front-end language that uses, or framework that uses JavaScript as a base language. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be building a new front end that, instead of using JavaScript like I have here, it's going to use React. And it's going to be a very similar process, but completely different at the same time. So here's my backend, just as an introduction. It has a database where I saved all of the information related to these cards. The link that I just visited in the browser is actually where the API that I got this information from. So back here in some file somewhere, I'm creating the code that will turn that API that we saw in the browser into an API for my own development reasons. So now if I go to, I'm going to navigate to the backend, the directory that the backend is in, because I'm in this parent directory. I'm navigating to the backend, and now I can run this commandment Rails S. And this is going to start my server. So we're looking at right now the server of somebody else who made this API, and they're making that information available to us so that we can use. I took that information and put it into my own backend server. So now if I go to cards, for instance, you see that I have the same cards. It's the same information. Everything's the same basically, except now it's in my actual backend. And it's being served up instead of from their link. So that's basically the backend in a nutshell. I've configured it so it's taking those cards from that API and serving it on my own server on my own API. So now I'm going to open another tab in my Visual Studio Code editor, and I'm going to go to the front end, and I'm going to, actually, I'm not using that front end anymore, right? I'm building my own. So we're going to use a commandment that will generate the template for a React application. React is a very popular web building or application building framework. And the way that you sort of start out with that is using this commandment, create React app. Then you just give it the name of the app. And I'm going to call this React Tarot. And that's going to generate the file. And this is going to use this other technology. So this is kind of a built-in script, and automatically it's going to start doing this. And it's going to build all of the stuff that it needs to put this new directory in here, which contains the React application. And right now, it's just like the bare bone template that it comes out of the box with. You know, now I can do whatever I want with it, but it's coming out with just like boilerplate, what we call boilerplate code, which is just like standard stuff that you'll probably need. So we're going to wait for that to finish.
Just a quick question in the chat, Matthew. London wants to know, why do you use NPX instead of NPM? Just wondering what the differences are.
I forget, actually, I forget the exact reason for NPX. There is a reason, but it has to do with the way that Node Project Manager works. You just need the X instead, in this case, to invoke some special, characteristic or special action, but it's generally still using Node Project Manager. I wonder, I don't know if it won't work with, I'm pretty sure it won't work if we use NPM. So there's a definite reason, I'm just not entirely sure of it. I'm sorry, I'll get back to you on that. So
no worries. I also just did a NPX versus NPM search, and this is what I got from Stack Overflow. So maybe that'll help as well.
Awesome.
And then there's another question. Are you working on a Mac right now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, I'm working on a Mac.
Thank you so much.
So it's saying that something's already running on port 3000, probably, and it's giving me a good, guess on what it is. This is the real key to programming. It's being able to work through your errors. I'm familiar with this error. I've gotten it lots of times. This is happening because React, the benefit of React over the JavaScript front end that I have right here is that React has its own client-side server, meaning not only is my backend serving the information, but React is going to have another server that it's using to operate. And they're both trying to use the same port, they're trying to use the same port to serve the information. So it's giving me this error. So I can handle that by just going back here. So let me close my React application, open the backend, and I need to go actually down to this file, the puma.rb, where I will tell Rails to actually run on port 3001 instead of 3000. Since React automatically wants to run on 3000, we'll just give it the space to run on 3000 and we'll run on port 3001 right now. So that's just kind of some setup stuff behind the scenes. Let me actually go back into React. the React directory. See, I have one instance of my terminal open in Rails, the back end, and I have another instance of my terminal open in the front end. So that's kind of how that's guiding that, that sort of workflow between the front end and the back end. So now I run yarn start because I'm using Yarn. I'm not using Node Project Manager. You can also use Node Project Manager, but I'm using Yarn. It's a little bit faster, I find. And now I'm going to, this opens like what React will come out with. Straight out of the box, this is what React looks like. So I don't need this right now. I kind of like the background color. Maybe I'll figure out which color that is and keep that. But everything else, even though not really, because I'll do that when I get to styling. But I'm going to go in here. And this is my React. This is what was generated by npx create React app. It calls my React app by its name, and then it just gives it a whole bunch of generic sort of components, which is what we call the pieces that we put together to make a full app. We call them components, and components will return at the very least some sort of what's called JSX, which is a mixture of JavaScript, HTML. So we call it JSX, and you can now interpolate, what we call interpolate, or sort of insert into here JavaScript code, even though it's HTML. So this is a real benefit of React, and what makes React so powerful is the special sort of JSX language. There are other things, but that's a main thing. But a component will consist of a function which returns some JSX. And that's how we're gonna put our application together. So right now, I've gotten rid of everything that was in here. So if I go back here, you see it's just a blank screen because it's returning just an empty, what we call div, which is an HTML element. And it's just basically a container, a box that will contain what's in our web page. So the React is sort of laid out like a tree, starting with the parent-most component. And you see here it's saying render, it's using React DOM, and it's rendering, and it's doing all of this foreign language. This is all saying that, so remember how or I might not have mentioned it, I might have just mentioned it in a lecture before this, but if I were building an application that was all Rails, right? Like what if I didn't want to have React or JavaScript? I just wanted to build a full application in here that the client will see. That's different because every time I request a new page, it will show a brand new HTML document. It's going to process my request that I sent using the browser, and it's going to send me a brand new page. And every time I click on something, it's likely going to open a brand new page. And that's if I were doing everything with just Rails. But since I'm adding React in, React acts as what we call single page application, allowing us to use one HTML document. And then what React's job is to do, React's job is to insert all of the HTML that I'm returning from all of my different components. It's going to sort of insert it into this one HTML document and add and remove stuff as I need to. You'll see what I mean a little bit more about that in a minute. But the point is, you're not loading entirely new HTML pages. This is called a single page application because it's using one HTML page and just rendering everything inside of this one div that they call root. But basically everything that's going to be our application is just going to be put inside of this div and removed when we don't need it, and then put back when we do need it. So you'll see what I mean in a second as we start to build more.
Matthew, sorry to interrupt. There's a quick question in the Q&A. Is there any GitHub repo to see the code directly?
I can totally, so okay, here's the repo. Okay, let me get that pulled up really quick because it actually might be really helpful. So here's the repo. This is my GitHub. And not sampler, but Taro Explorer is what I call this one. Okay, here's the link for the repo. This will have the old JavaScript front end and the back end. So you could totally, I even have some simple instructions right here that might help you get through it, but you could totally fork and clone this directory so I'll put the link in the chat.
Yeah.
And then if you want to follow along, more or less you can. You would just need to make your own front end, but how do I actually type in the tab? I don't see.
If you want to just put it in our Slack convo
Yeah,
really
that might,
fast, and then I can put it in the chat.
right. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
No problem. So that's the repo that you can use to clone. You can press fork here and then code, copy this link, and then go to your own terminal and just type git clone and copy that link and press enter. That will fork this entire repository. Then you just have to navigate into the backend and run bundle and then Rails-S. So that's what this is describing down here. So if you follow these instructions, you should be able to be basically where I am right now. And then you would just have to create your own front end, which
Perfect.
You can either use a Replit online or you can do the actual code. I will also put this code, this front end that I'm doing right now, and make it available by the end of the end. So Tiffany, maybe you can get that out to them with the video.
Yeah, once you, since the video will go out in about 48 hours, whenever you do that, just send it over to me via our Slack, and then I can add that in the follow-up email.
Absolutely, awesome. So that sounds good. So I'm just gonna put, just to show how React is sort of working, this is HTML, right? I'm saying I want a header that says hello. And my wife's actually in a design course, and I overheard them talking about how it doesn't make sense, or it's not really good design to start a document with an H2, because by definition, H2 means it's the second most important header of the page. So if there is no H1, there's no reason to put an H2. So I'm starting it at H1. That's why I went back and made it into H1, and then I can put it H2. That will just, and H2 is saying it's not as important as an H1, but more important than an H3, which is the other type of thing that we can do. So these are just simple HTML elements. So I'll put just some words in here so you can see the differences in code. And notice down here, welcome Taro viewer. How about that? So let me go back here to the application and refresh the page. The server isn't running. And I was about to say, notice down here, we see things changing. Every time that we make a change and we hit save, this is re-rendering the page. So in that sense, you can code in real time. So I'll put an H4 here and watch when I press save, what it's gonna do down here in this section. Saying compiled, and it's saying compiled with warnings. This is what we call a linter, and it will tell you just like errors that you have in your code, either major errors that will keep your code from working, or just tiny stuff that's not keeping it from working, but should be fixed, such as it's saying that I'm importing logo here, but I'm not using it. So import is how we import things to our application to use. So importing tools to our application, and it's how we allow different parts of the application to communicate with each other. So I'm gonna delete that H4, go back here, and you see that H1 is most important, H2 is less important, and H3 is the less important, but more important than an H4. They go all the way up to H6s. But for now, what we want to do, what is our application exactly? Our application is going to be something that a user visits. Let's say there's going to be multiple routes, right? Let's say that we're going to have 3 routes. One route will be, or no, let's just say for now, yeah, we'll have 2 routes. We'll just say for now we have 2 routes. This is going to be a really simple application. So we have 2 links that will transfer between 2 different pages. One page will be our home page, which will kind of just give us a card of the day. It'll choose a random card out of our deck and sort of show its characteristics, you know, and we can then save the card or something like that into our favorites, right? So let's kind of just think of our application like that. And that's the first part of building any application, just understanding how the structure of the application will be. I think that since this is going to be a super simple application with a super simple, you know, everything is pretty simple, well, let me go ahead. So I'm going to say, let's just leave this there for now, because that's the very least that a JSX component has to return is an empty div. Just that's the very least. I'll get an error if I don't do that, in fact. See.
One quick question that just came up in the chat is,
What's
how
that?
do you, Naomi wants to know, how do you do the roots? They had an issue with that this week.
The roots?
Yeah, ROUTES? I don't know.
Oh yeah, okay, cool. We'll totally get to that. That's actually, look, that'll be the first thing that we do. So, okay,
Perfect.
really quick, I'm going to go ahead and add some components. So besides the files that they automatically give you with React, you can also like build more and of your own custom components. We're going to do React using hooks. So it's going to be a little bit different. You might see React done a little bit differently somewhere else, but this is the way that most people do it now. The other way using classes is a little bit more, it's a little bit older, and you'll only see it in legacy code. We're using functional components, and in order to give functional components the abilities to use the same thing as class components, we use hooks. So really quick, I'm gonna make a couple of blank components. I'm gonna say that this is gonna be the cards container. And this is going to look really ugly for a while, and we'll make it look nicer towards the end. And we're also going to make cards. Oh, well, let's change this because cards is one of the words I want to use. So we'll change this to tarot container. So that's an empty component with nothing in it. And we'll also do tarot cards. And cool. So that'll basically be, so one will have, so, and then we'll do one more. Let's call this one, let's see, let's just call this welcome. Let's just call this welcome. Let's keep it simple. So we have 3 components, and we're basically going to be able to route between at least 2 of them. So before I get the route set up, I'm going to make these into just blank components. There are extensions you can add using Visual Studio Code. So if I go to like here, extensions, I can add an extension. I forget what it's exactly called, so I won't waste too much time going into it, but you can probably find it pretty easily. But I have one that's called RSC that will generate the template for a functional component, which is what we're using. It's called a functional component. And this will be one piece of the pieces that we use to create this whole application. So, and one more thing, this needs to actually be tarot card, singular, because that's what it is. So it's going to represent one card. This will be the container that represents all of the cards. This is where we're going to have all of our cards. And this is going to represent just like a home page that will be what the user first sees. So here, I'm going to just put an H1 that says welcome. And here, I'm going to say, do the same thing, an H1 that says tarot deck, whatever. And then welcome page, tarot card. Let's just, and these are kind of just placeholders for now until I actually get some code in here, but this is going to represent one particular tarot card. So we'll just put tarot card. Okay. Now if we go to app.js, this is where the magic, so to say, is happening with routing. So what do we need in order to build a router? We have to add a few things. Now, remember when I said when you use import statements, you're importing the tools that you need in order to build your application. Well, if we add more tools in from the web, we can import those in and use them as well. So some things React doesn't come straight out the box with, so you have to add them, either using Yarn or Node Project Manager or something like that. But I'm gonna use Yarn, and I'm going to say yarn add React router DOM. And this should be all that we need in order to fully implement routing in our React application. So that is done. I will start my server again, even though I'm not visiting anything, or it's just a blank screen right now because we don't have anything. It's always good to just have the linter open so that you can see if you're running into any issues in real time. So, and you see it says compiled successfully because I don't have anything necessarily wrong right now. So what I will do now is start building the router. First, what I'll need to do is import, and I'm importing from React, right? React some class that's defined somewhere in the node modules. These are all of my tools that I have available to me that are what make up React. So I just add, when I did yarn add React router DOM, that's where it went. It went into my node modules, which will contain the classes, which will have the tools that I need. Right now, I need browser router from that from, actually not just yet. I'm not going to need to do this just yet, even though I will need to do this. I'll do this. So import React from React. That's not what I need for the router, but I still will need that eventually. Now for the router, I need React router DOM, and you see it's sort of auto-filling the things that it finds in my node modules. And what I need to import from there is browser router as router. That's just kind of standard how you do it. Just rename it as router. And we can call route, which is, or root, which is what we're going to need to actually render a root. And rendering is what it's called when something appears on the screen to the client. Is what we call the person using the site. We call them the client, and we call it rendering when they can see something. So router, route, switch is, I'll also need, and let's put these things together. And that's all coding. For those of you who are super new to coding, that's all that coding is. It's just taking different tools, which instead of being physical tools like a screwdriver and stuff, they're software, and just knowing how to apply those tools to the situation at hand. So React Router is just a library that allows us to easily implement like a routing system in our application. So we have router, then we're going to have routes within it. So here's a route here, and here's a route here. And now we have two routes technically that we can visit. Okay, so let's do, now we have to basically tell it to, or what's the path that this route will respond to. So when I type in a path at the top here, what it's going to be able to respond with something, and what should it respond with, and what it's not going to be able to respond with anything. So here I can say the route or the path for this is going to be the root path. And in that case, I'm going to have to say exact, because it's sort of, it's because the way the router reads the roots, like slash is technically part of every root. So without the exact there, it'll try to render the first, everything that has a slash in it. And we don't want that, because everything will have a slash in it. For instance, the next root would be something like exact path. Let's say the next root is something like cards, which will allow us to view all the cards and sort cards depending on, you know, some sort of characteristic. Now this route technically still contains this. So it would try to render both of these, or either just one or the other. Either way, it wouldn't work. We can do two things to prevent that from happening, and that's to add a switch in, which will keep it from only rendering one thing at a time. And now a good precaution would be to put your root route last, but at the very least, you could put exact in front of your path, and it'll make sure that the path matches exactly before it tries to render that particular component. Now, what do I mean by rendering a particular component, right? I mean that these roots will accept as an argument one of the components that we have just created. So here are three components. First, we need to import those components from their respective files. So import tarot card from, now we give it a relative path from this file to the file that I want to actually use. So tarot card from, I'm going to go into in the same directory. I'm going to go into the components folder and grab that component. And you see it's now telling me we defined it, but we never used it. We'll ignore that just for now, in time for me to import the rest of this stuff. So tarot container is what I called it, right? So tarot container from, and the same thing, a relative path in the same directory. I'm going to look at the components folder and grab the container out of it and import. And I can call these files whatever I want. This is just what I'm calling these, just to kind of keep it simple without me having to think too hard about what to call them. But we can call these files whatever we want, actually. And these are custom components. React came with one already built called app, which is being rendered by the top of the tree, app, then app will begin to render its children. And that's what we refer to them as. The parent to app is index, because index is going to render app. The parent to index is the parent most component. App is the next one, and it has children as well. The parent to all of these routes will be app. So that's important to know. We'll revisit that in a second. So the page that I want to show all the cards is tarot container. That's going to be the page that like kind of gives me all of the cards to see. Like I can just, that's going to be the first thing we do. It's just get to the point where we can see all the cards on that page. And then we'll build out the rest of the stuff. The home path or the root route will render welcome, that component. And this, it should be just as easy as that. Now, because our router is set up and our switch is switching between the routes, and we have exact in front of here to make sure it's rendering the correct thing. Now, when I go to my route or my go here, I can go to the deck. And if I go to the root route, it'll show welcome. And I can add any more routes that I want. But this is the very beginning of what we need to do to just have an application. So now we have two different routes that we can go to, and I can call these routes whatever I want. Just to keep it simple, we use this convention called RESTful routing that basically says we're going to kind of name our routes after things that the routes have to do with. You know, it's this convention of naming our routes depending on what resource the route is dealing with. So because this route is dealing with viewing the whole deck of cards, we just call it cards. We could have called it deck, but you'll see why we're calling it cards in a second. And it has to do with RESTful routing. So let me go back and continue on. Did you have any questions about that? I forgot.
Yeah, there was a question. Someone wanted to know what would exact path be necessary to use here if we are all using switch? Could we use path in quotation marks?
I can totally use path for this because my root route comes last and because I'm using switch. The combination of those two things is keeping me in the same, it's the same thing. Now I can still just go to cards and it'll only render the one thing. The problem with this would come if I did this and put the root route first. Now what's going to happen when I try to visit cards, it's going to keep rendering the root route because it's dealing with the way that it's reading the URL. It's going to stop at the switch is causing it to stop at the first thing that matches the route, right? So technically this route has this slash in it. So it's going to stop there. Switch is causing it to stop there and only render that route, no matter what route we type in. In fact, let me delete switch and show you what happens. Oops. Let me not close anything. Okay. So now you see it renders all routes that match that path. So all routes that match, that have a slash in it will now be rendered when I visit, no matter what I visit. So cards, I can go to the root route, and that works because it's first and it'll stop there. But any other one, it'll match what matches the route and other things that partially match the route, such as just a slash. So putting switch in, make sure that no matter what, at least it's only rendering one page or one component, because it's all on one page. It's all just, React's job is to manipulate what we call the document object model, which is the DOM, which is allowing us to see this. React is just manipulating it so it looks like we're visiting more pages, but they're actually like sort of erasing the screen and then redrawing what it needs. Sort of, you can think of it like that, using something called the virtual DOM. But now, if I either put this below and go back here, it'll now work because cards isn't a partial match to this. This is a partial match to that. So it has to do with the order that it's reading it. So it's going to be like, oh, this matches cards, then stop here. But if we do this, then it's going to be like, oh, this contains a slash, so stop here instead. So the way that we get around that is either you could be safe and put exact here, or you can put it last. You can also put last, but exact's just kind of like a fail-safe. I usually put that on all my paths just to make sure that all of them are just getting the exact path. So it's up to you in the end. It's up to you and how you want to format it. Did that sort of clarify that a little bit?
I think so.
Sweet.
Albert asked in the Q&A, please explain the difference between static root and dynamic root.
Static root is like cards. So that's actually our next point, right? So static root is sort of like cards, where no matter what, when I visit cards, it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same. Now, a dynamic route is more like if I did something like this, where I said there's also a route called cards that will also take an ID. And it's going to be one card. So this goes back to RESTful routing, meaning we're naming our routes having to after what those routes are dealing with. So cards, its job, it's dealing with the cards resource in your application, and its job is to display the index, all of the cards. So we're going to just give it the static route of all cards, because no matter what, all of our cards are always going to be the same. But this one, it's going to give me one particular card, and it's dynamic because this can change depending on which card I want to view. I'm going to put the ID, and this is sort of another convention. We use the ID to recognize which card particularly we're talking about. The ID is unique for everything that we put in our database. So back to the back end, if we look, if we go back here to my API, this is their API. Notice their API has type, name short, it has this stuff, right? No ID in here. There's no thing called ID. There's a value int, which is similar, but there's nothing called an ID. But when I go to localhost 3001, and I go to cards to view all the cards. In fact, here's a dynamic route right here. What if I want to view the first card, just card number 1? I'm going to say card 1. This is a dynamic route because it's going to change depending on what value is there. What you see is going to change depending on which value is there. So back to my API. Now you see my API, because I seeded it into my database, everything in SQL databases, because it's what we call a relational database, meant to establish relationships between different resources, such as a card can belong to a deck. How do we show that the card belongs to the deck? Well, we say that that deck has that card's ID in it, because that's a unique identifier to say that this card. Now, we also use that ID for lots of different things, such as viewing different pages. So the same way that I have this dynamic route here in React, that's the same way my backend is working. And it's because of this convention called RESTful routes. So back here, you see I have routes, a routes.rb, and it itself has resources. And resources is a shortcut in Rails to generate the routes all the routes that have to do with manipulating these resources are magically sort of being generated. And now we use a controller to make requests to these different routes. So each of these functions corresponds to a route that I can request. And for instance, this one, when I'm using cards/4, is corresponding to the show action, meaning I want to show one card. And you see this is rendering card. This is some stuff that's happening behind the scene where I'm setting the card. The set card function will take the ID. So it's going to find the card in the database by that ID, and the ID is being passed in via the params hash, because this number is going to be put into the params hash in the key of ID. A hash is a data set that includes a key and a value, much like an API. Here's the key, its name, and the value will be the string that's emperor. So back here in the params, when I'm doing this, I'm inserting in the params hash this value for the ID of whatever is. It's easier to see, but in Rails, it's a little bit hidden because we just have these resources, but I'm mimicking the RESTful routes on the front end. So I can close my back end now, and I can go back to the front end and see this is creating a params. It's just a way that the web communicates. Every application will use params in some way, but basically we're creating a key, and I could call this whatever I want, card ID, but whatever I call this key, when I make my request, there's going to be a hash. Every request has params, and in the params, it has a key value pair, and whatever number I put here will be put in that hash with the key of whatever's here and the value of whatever I typed in. So that's how it knows that I want to view the 4th card, because I typed in the number 4 here. I can view the third card because I typed in number 3 here. So that's how it's working. It's transferring this value into the params hash, and then we can get that value using the ID, which is whatever I put here. And that's a dynamic route. It's allowing us to change what the viewer sees depending on what we put into the route. Because if I hard coded the number 1 here, that's a static route. Now it's only going to show the number 1 every time. But using this dynamic ID, we can make that whatever we want. So this is related to your React app still, but just know that when I'm doing this on my API, it's kind of doing the same thing, but on my back end. I'm filtering by that particular params of ID. And then that's what you are seeing when it's a little less intuitive when you just look at it. But here, this method is being called when I get a request to this route. And notice here in the docs or a comment I put in here, it's showing that this is what the route will look like. When someone requests this route, it takes this number and inserts it to the params hash. And we find the card with that ID. And that is the card that's being returned here. And we're rendering that as JSON. So that's how we get here to this point. So now let's go about getting all of our cards from our database. So
there's just two questions. One is Casey said, and I think this goes back a little bit, but it's like the most general is last and the most specific comes first. I don't know if that makes sense to you. We might.
That's sort of true.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
they will take priority.
Gotcha. And then Naomi says pulling it's pulling from the ID from the database, correct?
Yes, the ID is associated with a card when I seed it into my database, right? Because that's what this file here is. This is how I got the information in my database. I created this class that will visit that that link that I originally showed you, and it will seed cards into my database using that link. So create cards is a method in here that will iterate over all of those cards that we see in the first link. So the first link that I showed you guys, that I sent to you guys, it'll go to that first link, get all of those cards, and it's creating a new card in my database based on that information from the API that I used. So that's how the cards get an ID. And yes, that's stored in the database. So when I call for a card by a particular ID, which is automatically assigned, it's automatically incremented. When I create one card, it gives it the 1. Next time I create a card, it's going to automatically know to make it 2 until, every card has, so that every card has a unique ID. But now when I say that I want card number 5, my controller in the backend knows to serve up the information for that particular card based on some logic, that I set beforehand.
And then there's just in the chat, Naomi also wants to know, do these need semicolons at the end? And it's the import home from /component /home /component about and /component /contact. Do those need semicolons?
Contact, wait, let me.
If you look at in the chat, I don't know if you can see the chat, but she listed it out on your app.js file. That's what
import home from, okay. So
do they need the semicolon?
No, you don't need the semicolon in there. It doesn't look like you need the semicolon. If you're getting an error, it could possibly be because the names of the classes are lowercase, but I don't think so. Simply because they're components, components do need to be uppercase. So maybe uppercase home, about, and contact right after the word import. And that might help you out a little bit. So components, that's a good point, actually. Components, when I'm creating them, notice how I put them all uppercase. That's usually a no-no in JavaScript. You don't create functions that start with capital letters, but when we're dealing with JSX, React components is a little bit different. So hopefully
yeah, cool. Naomi said hers were in lowercase, so I think she's going to try it in uppercase.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's a convention. My laptop's dying, so I just got to plug it up really quick. Cool. So that's that. Let me make sure it's plugged in. That one likes to fall out. Okay.
I think that's all the questions we have so far, so you can continue on.
Okay. And awesome. Great questions, guys. So let's go, and gals. I don't want to, Yeah. So let's go here. And okay, so now we're finally to the point where we have some general structure to our application. One thing that is going to be super handy for us, even though we're not making things necessarily look beautiful just yet, one thing that might be super helpful for us is to create a nav component really quick. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to make something called navbar .jsx and use my generator again. And this is going to return a nav, which is an HTML component, which will take ULs. And here's another important thing to know. When you're doing links, normally if I'm doing a link in HTML, I would use it, what we call an A tag. So just like I have div, I have nav, I have li, there's an A tag, and that's what your link is. Li stands for list item, and nav, of course, stands for navigation bar. So I'm going to import something called nav link from React router DOM. And this is, instead of putting an A tag here, which will take an href, which will be the link of the place that I want this to go. That's typically how you would make a link in HTML. We're going to use the special nav component or nav link component that is provided to us by React router DOM. And all we basically need to tell it is where to go. We're using this because we're using React router. And remember what I said, HTML, one HTML page is being used to load all of this stuff. So we're not actually leaving the page when we click a link. We're actually just fooling the HTML document into displaying what we want it to display. So this one will be called, oh, and let me make this a full. Two ways that you can do HTML. You can, for most components, you could either make it two tags that will contain something in the middle. Like right now, I'm going to say that this is the home page. And this is going to make the value of this nav link home. So when I come back here, oh, I haven't displayed it to, I haven't rendered it to the DOM yet. So that's why, even though I put the code there, nothing shows up. Let me finish the other two routes, or the other one route, really. It's only one other route that we really need to show just yet. We might have time to do the rest of them just to, so you guys can see how, but these are the more important ones right now. So cards and Terra deck, I can maybe say something more like explore. So we just have home and explore. Those are our two routes. They're inside of list items, which are inside of the nav. That's just kind of the standard for how you want to set your nav up. So now I can import from nav bar, and that's in the same directory, the component folder, nav bar, and oops, okay, import nav bar from nav bar, okay. And now I can go down here, and I want the nav bar to appear on all routes. So I'm going to put it outside of the switch statement. So nav bar. And just like I was just mentioning, you can have either two tags or you can just have one. It depends on how you need to use that element. Navbar doesn't need anything. That's what I also did with Terra Container. Welcome. They don't need anything like as their value on the inside. So they don't need this like for route. It needs as its value, the Terra Container. So that's why I needed to make two tags. But some of them you can just make a shortcut and just do one. So now that should be good. Now we see that we have our links and it's navigating to the different pages. Oops, in our application. Did I just press back? Cool. So, and okay.
There's just two questions. I think
what's up?
What is the difference between link and route or route? And someone asked, why didn't you use link?
Link, I forget the exact, let me look it up for you really quick. There is a difference between navlink and link. I just don't, it's been so long since I've even used link. I used to only use links, but at some point I switched to navlink, and let's see why. So when you use link, styling attributes, when you use style a class, then you can use Navlink. I don't see an easy answer to that. There is a difference. That's another one of those things that I've just forgotten since learning. And it's been a while since I've used the link. I think it does have to do something with styling.
And I just want to stress that what Matthew just did in Googling is a big part of coding. You'll be Googling a lot. Thank you, Naomi, for putting a link in the chat for everyone.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, one more, go ahead.
One more question, sorry. How come your component files have the .jsx extension as opposed to .js?
Because I like the React symbol. Right, as opposed to the JS. It's just preference for in this situation. I don't quote me on that because I don't know if there is a big difference that I'm just not understanding or that I just haven't run into contact with. But for the most part, they'll do the exact same thing. Sometimes it is a little annoying. I think it does have to do with the extensions that, like, for instance, when I want to auto-complete an HTML element, I think doing JSX for one of the extensions that I have, it does it easier with JSX, but also it ruins some stuff. So I think it's about just how you like your environment configured and what types of shortcuts and extensions that you have and what type of you can use it to generate things more easily.
Perfect. That's all I had on my end.
Mm-hmm. No problem. So yeah, but reiterating what you said before, learning and Googling are literally a never-ending thing. There's no point where I feel like you're so advanced that you don't have to look at anything. But yeah, it's a huge part of learning is a huge part of working in software engineering. And you'll be on Google a lot, on Stack Overflow, stuff like that. And they have some really smart people out there who just know these things from years of experience. So they have a lot of stuff they can teach you. Okay, so we basically have our route set up, right? This is where we are now. We can transition between these two. How do we actually go about displaying the information for tarot cards now? So we can do that by, okay, so here's the thing. The way that I want my welcome page to work, I kind of wanted to just like show a random card, and the user can look at that random card and save it to their favorites, which would be another component, of course, that I'd be building, or more information that I'd be adding to the application. But keeping it simple, we want welcome to have access basically what I'm saying is before this application even shows the welcome page, I want it to have knowledge about the cards on my API. So how do I do that? I can do that by using hooks in React. So now we can get into hooks. Now we can actually get into making this a stateful application that actually has stuff in it. And by stateful, I mean it contains information that's being adjusted as I go throughout the use of the program. So right now, there's nothing that's changing with this application. I can press and press and press all day, and it's not going to change what we call the state of the application. That's when I add stuff in that will allow me to, that's when I'm starting to build functionality into my application. So I started with React using class components, but since then I have learned how to use hooks, and it's made life honestly a lot easier. I don't know why it took me so long. It didn't even take me that long, but that goes to show you how easy hooks are. But understanding the basics of how React is working, you'll get a lot of that from using class-based components. So I definitely recommend on your guys' in the future learning both, but hooks are definitely the better way to go when it comes to the stuff. Oh, awesome. Thanks, James, because I totally forgot. I totally dropped the ball on that question. Yeah, a root is basically, think of that as like a socket, and the link is actually the plug. If that makes any sense, but basically your root will accept a link's request. Your application setting up routes is giving it the ability to respond to, it's kind of like a signature, or an address. That's why we call them links addresses, or link, when we're linking something, we're putting the address there, because this is an address to tell the browser to respond with a particular thing. This is going to respond with one particular card or whatever, So the link, the path is basically just like an address A link is like a vehicle that brings you to that address. That's a better analogy than the plug in the socket. But a link will bring you to an address, and an address is sort of like where that HTML or that content resides. So that's kind of going to be the difference between those two. So now we can actually start to get the information, right? So what is this application going to deal with? And cards, ultimately. This is how you use hooks to set the state. We're going to use state, and what state will return, when something returns something in computer science in general, it means that once this function is called, meaning once the interpreter reads this line and it executes this function will return these two variables. And these are our state variables. This contains the variable itself, which is initialized as an empty array. So now when I want to change this array, it will cause re-renders in our application, which will allow the information to be updated. So this is an empty array now, but when I grab the information from my API, I'm going to use set cards to put that information in this array or in this variable. Set cards is a callback function that is provided by useState to set the state, to set the state to be something new. So let's go on with that. You'll see it a little bit more in action in a second. Now, useEffect is a hook that will mimic something in class components called lifecycle, which will allow us to control the timing of things. So it's controlling when things happen in our application. So useEffect will take an empty array if I only want it to happen one time. So when the application first loads, this useEffect will run one time because this empty array of what we call dependencies. So because this empty array of dependencies, it's only going to run one time on page load and then never again, unless one of the dependencies changes. If we were to put cards in here, every time cards changes, then this function would run again. But we don't want to do that, because what this function is going to do is use what we call a fetch request to grab the information from the API and bring it to this application. And I see I got a couple. Do I have any? Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is give it the location or the link or the address to my API, which will contain the information I want to extract and bring over to this application. I just happen to know that my application, remember at the beginning when we changed Rails to run on 3001 instead of 3000, I just know that with Rails applications, the default port is localhost 3000. That's where it's going to be running. But because I changed it to 3001, it's going to do 3001. And what do I want to fetch from this link? I actually want to fetch from /cards, because remember, RESTful routes dictate that we're going to name our routes after the resource that they're dealing with. So if I want to see all cards, I want to make a GET request. I want to make a GET request. And look, Visual Studio Code gave me the option to click this link and open it. And when I open it, it shows you my API, because that's where we're fetching from. So I want to grab the cards, and this fetch request is what we call an asynchronous function in JavaScript. It's or asynchronous execution in computer science is just a thing altogether. But the idea is that multiple things can be happening at one time. When this useEffect gets called, it's going to make this fetch request. Then it's going to wait for a response, because we're making a request to an address. And the way that the web works is we type in our link, it makes a request to that server to return the resources that are at that link. So for instance, right here, my API is set up to when I request this link, it's going to return for me all of the cards, because I'm asking for all the cards. If I just ask 1 at 1, I would say all of the cards whose ID is 1. That's kind of the layman's terms of what's happening there. But essentially, it's going to wait until I get that response before it moves on. And it's going to allow this whole thing to finish grabbing the cards and allow the rest of the application to still render. So it's kind of like, that's why they call it useEffect. It's kind of like a side effect, or it's like something that's happening on the side. It's allowing us to do two things at once. The function is going to render, but on the side, it's also fetching this information. And when it becomes available to us, so when we first make the request, it's going to send back a response, right? And with that response, we want to parse the JSON out of it. JSON is just a JavaScript object notation. That's this sort of format of looking at the code, where we have key value pairs and they're put inside of these curly brackets. That's called JavaScript object notation. So I want to parse the JSON out because that's what this is. We want to parse this information out of our response because the response will have a status, a header, and a body. We want to parse just the JSON out of the body. So that's basically what we're doing with this next line. And once that happens, we want to then, with that JSON, so after this has happened, we parse the JSON out. And basically, this now represents JSON, the JSON that was parsed out, which is the information about the card. So we can really call this cards data. And we're going to put it in. So these are called arrow functions. They're another way of defining your function, just like this. Just like we do this, where we have the name of the function, and we have, these are what we call anonymous functions that don't have a name, but they still take arguments, which is what response here is. This would be the argument that's coming in from outside. And in this case, it's being returned by fetch. Fetch is returning a promise for a response. And we're saying once we get that response, we want to parse the JSON out of it. And once we parse the JSON out of it, we're going to have cards data. And then, so that's returning a promise for cards data eventually. Once we get the cards data, what we want to do is set cards and pass in cards data. And now the information from the JSON will be there, like the information from this particular page in the JSON will be inside of cards data. So all of this information. And now we can iterate, what we call iterate over this data and kind of do stuff with it from here. So now I can also do this, by the way, for you guys who are a little bit more advanced and just want to see some cool tricks. You can also, of course, do that because you're naming a callback function and it's going to automatically pass in the response, or the whatever's returned by this then will be passed in automatically and it'll call this function. So set cards is a callback function. And we're basically saying we want cards to be equal to whatever passed into here. So let's visualize how this is going to work a little bit better. We'll probably be able to do that a little bit better than we are able to sort of explain it. So remember, fetch is asynchronous. And it's saying, and these .thens are saying, after this happens, then do this. After this happens, then do this. So this way you can make sure that you're only going to try to like set the data when it's actually available and not when the interpreter first interprets this line. And that's what it means to be asynchronous. It's going to happen on the side and it's going to return that data when it's done. So that's a big part of fetching information from an API right here. This is really where the magic is happening, where I'm now requesting that information and setting it as the state. So now what can I do? I think what would be helpful now is for us to be able to see a little bit of the work that we're doing. So I'm going to change this back into an arrow function. And now because it's an arrow function, I can now put a debugger here, and a debugging terminal will allow us to stop the code where it is and view things like just if we're ever, they call it a debugger because bugs are when you run into problems with your code, and a debugger will help you find it, There's a funny story about how they came up with that. You'll probably hear it a million times being in the coding world, but keep an ear out for that. So I'm going to go back to my React application and open the inspector tools. These are like your tools that the browser gives you in order to develop. Basically, this is your way of debugging things. I'm going to go to the console, and then I'm going to refresh the page. So remember, I told you use effect will happen once when the page first loads. So notice that you see stuff on the page. So typically in coding, things will happen in order. This line will happen, not all the time. This is not a hard rule, but for the most part, this line will happen, then that line will happen, then that line will happen, then so on and so forth. But with use effect, it's allowing things to happen simultaneously while this stuff inside of here happens. So notice everything's on the screen even though it's further down here for that to happen. And that's because useEffect was called once, and now we don't get here until that information was actually retrieved. And by that time, all of the other stuff has rendered. So that's what I mean by asynchronous. Now I'm here in the debugger, right? And you see that here, it'll give you a whole bunch of data about like what's going on in your code. So my useEffect ran, I made my fetch request, it returned the cards data, and right here, cards data, it's showing you is available to us. We can use it. We can do something with this cards data now. So you see it's the deck of cards of 78 cards. And what I want to do, like I had before, so I'm going to exit out of this debugger, and then I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to erase and really what I'm doing here, I will leave it so you guys can visualize it a little bit better. Cards data, we're passing the information from the response to our API into set cards, which is going to set this variable right here to contain the cards information. So now I can do something along the lines of this. Like, this is a good habit to have when you're doing asynchronous stuff in React, especially. So here's something that we're going to do. We're going to make this variable called requesting. And we're going to set requesting. We're going to make our callback, set requesting, which is then going to use state, and it's going to set it to false, or actually I'm going to set it to true. Because I'm going to assume that when the page first loads, it's requesting, right? So I don't want to say false, that when the page first loads, because there's going to be that split second where it needs to say requesting true when it's going to say requesting false. So I'm going to set it as true to begin with. And then what I'm going to do in here is something that is very much necessary when it comes to asynchronous. Okay, I can't get rid of the whole div like that, but I can get rid of the router. So I can say, do what we call a ternary operator, where if requesting returns true, which it should automatically, I'm going to return something maybe like H, let's do like, I guess just like a P that says loading. So it's not going to try to use any data that's being loaded, because I'm saying if I'm requesting, don't try to use the data, just show this that says loading. Else, if I'm not requesting, this is where things get a little bit more clear. I'm going to put these on separate lines just to keep everything a little bit neater. So I'm going to say if I'm not requesting, then then display everything, display the routes, display everything. We're able to, again, and let me make sure that this is okay to do in my parent most component. Yeah, it should be. So you see it's showing loading up here, and because loading is set to true and I'm never changing it, it's just going to continuously say loading in an infinite loop. To change that, what I will do is I will say when useEffect first starts, set requesting to true. But when I'm done setting the cards data, I don't think I necessarily have to do this in a parent most component. I don't like doing this in here, so I'm going to change this up just a little bit. So I'm going to render my routes all the time. I just don't, it's still going to work if I do this, but I'm just going to make, if I'm going to teach you guys, let's teach you something a little bit neater. And what I'm going to do instead is, that's then making it more annoying. Yeah, I'll just do this. This is fine, because I'm basically saying I don't want any of my components to be trying to use cards, because notice in a second, I'm going to pass cards down to my components so that they can use this variable. But I'm basically saying, don't even give them the option to use the cards or anything if I'm loading. Just say loading, and then return my router once my stuff is done loading. So let me try this. I set requesting to true at first, but after I'm done setting the cards, I'm going to set requesting to false. And let's try to see if this works. Yeah, and you see now when I load my page, it'll say loading for a split second while it loads the cards. Then it'll show me the page that I'm actually wanting to see. And this is probably the best way to do it for a very simple application. This application is very simple. We only have 2 pages. We are not having to pass Normally, if we had a really complex application, because Java React communicates the way that it does, it passes information from the parent going down. That's basically how it works. If the parent has access to information that most of these components need, it's better to get that information in the parent and pass it down. But you can imagine if we have a bunch of stuff we have to keep track of that every app needs, it could get a little messy. And for instance, if we not only have those, but we also have this, and we have this, and we have this, and all of your cards, all of your components need access to all of this stuff, it gets a little messy passing them down. So, but since this is just a very simple component, I'm going to put this up here, but look into things such as use context and use reducer for you guys who are familiar with this kind of stuff and you want to know how to do this more efficiently. It just makes no sense now because the application is so small. But okay, so by the time we get here, set requesting is false and we are able to see the stuff. And this is a ternary operator where we're asking a question, is this true or false? If it is, do this. If it's not, do that. It's kind of like if you guys are familiar with the if statement, a fancy one. So now let's actually do stuff with these cards. We finally gotten our application, the bare bones of it up and running. We've retrieved the cards. Let's now actually use the cards in some way. So what I will do is I will pass down what we call props. And this prop will be called cards. We're going to make this variable that Taro container has access to called cards. And what it's going to be equal to is the cards that I have here, which remember, because we did this, has the cards from the database. And this is how we're going to start making stuff actually happen. So cards being passed down. Okay. And that's it for now. Welcome. The reason that I put the cards put the fetch for the cards in this container is because the welcome needs it too. So that's why I'm doing this here as well. And that's why I put all of this in here and not in Taro container. Like, since this is the deck of cards, you would think that this contains the cards, but it makes more sense to actually do it this way for a simple application because both of these routes will need the cards and I'm passing it down from the parent. So it makes more sense. So now both of those have access to the props. Props is short for properties. When you instantiate a component, it will accept props, which is basically this. You say cards is equal to, then you put the curly brackets and you put something in there that cards will be equal to. And I'll probably also need set cards. That'll probably be something that comes in handy too. The ability to set the cards, I'll probably need to pass down as well. I don't think I actually even need to pass down cards here. Really, I need to pass down one random card. So I could do something like that and then make that equal to, and then generate the code up here to do a random card. I'll just put cards at the index of 0 just for now. So let's get our homepage looking like something first before we get into and we'll just use one random card, which is the first card. So let's go into welcome and let's actually start building some stuff finally. So remember, I said the props will come in from the parent. So here you notice that I'm passing in random card. So if I go in here, I can use a technique called object deconstruction, because normally what happens is props is passed in here. I can, props can be deconstructed because it's an object. We can do something called deconstruction on objects, which is a technique that allows us, since we know that one of the keys, because props is set up like an object, it's key value pairs. So random card is going to be a key in the props object, and the value is going to be the first card in the deck. So if I go back into welcome, since we know props is going to contain a key called random card that contains a card, we can actually use deconstruction to deconstruct the properties and say that random card is now just going to be a variable called random card that contains whatever was in the key of this in the prop. So because the key was called random card and it contained a random card, I can use deconstruction to say, okay, let's deconstruct that object into variables, and whatever was in the key of random card, make it equal to this variable. So now I can do some stuff that'll actually look decent. So let's do a div, and let's put just a couple of break tags. This will typically be done with CSS, but when you're doing software engineering, the first priority, honestly, is to get the minimal viable product, right? To get the least, do the least that you have to do to make this product work and be, demonstratable, that you can demonstrate it to a client or something, or how it works. And that's basically what we're doing. So we're just going to do some break tags instead of actually doing CSS styling to make this look pretty. But okay, so let's now put inside of here an H2, which will have, so this is random card, right? Now, here's the question. So I'm going to get some stuff set up really quick. Here's the question. What is the card? What are the characteristics of a card? What can we now deconstruct this card as? And the answer to that, since we know that the first card is going to be this card, I'm kind of just going to go here and kind of read off of it, right? We know that this is going to have a short name, an ID, a name, a value int. All of these things are characteristics or keys in this object that we can now deconstruct, because remember, the random card will represent one of these things, one of these objects. So now we can deconstruct from that random card the characteristics it has. So let's do this. So random card is going to have some keys called ID, name short, name. So let's do that. ID, really, let's just take the stuff that we really need for now. I mean, but which is like most of it, but I won't do name short. I'll just do name. We don't need the short name for it, which is just for our convenience. So let's say, so if we keep going up, I'm going to do, okay, I just want to check out like a little bit about this API. So the value of this page. Okay, great. So the value int is always going to be a number. The value itself is going to be, and that's just kind of how cards work, tarot cards work. They count all the way up until 178. And within those, just like a deck of cards, each one will go up to like 13 and then start over in a new suit, go up to 13, start over in a new suit, so on and so forth. So that's the kind of information that we're wanting to display here. Let's display the name, the ID. We're definitely going to want to do the value. That's something that's important when it comes to reading tarot cards. And then meeting up is definitely important. When you pull a card and it's turned right side up, what does that mean, so to say? And when you have a card and it's facing reverse or it's facing downward, what does that mean? Meaning reverse. And card type was probably, in description, of course, probably one of the most important things that we're going to get out of here. Description. And card type is the last thing. Card underscore type. Awesome. So those are the things that we're deconstructing from the card itself. So the card is coming in through an object called props. And in the key, in props, we have a key called random card that contains the random card. So we're destructuring that from the props and just assigning random card a variable that has the value of whatever it was in the hash. We're doing the same thing with random card. Random card is just an object. So we're deconstructing those keys as variables. So now ID will contain whatever the key of ID was in this. And this just keeps me from having to do stuff like random card dot name, random card dot blah, blah, blah. I can now just refer to it directly. It's not a huge deal. It's just a convenience thing. So in an H2, I'm going to want to put the name of the card. We use these brackets to interpolate JavaScript into HTML, because remember, this is JavaScript or this is HTML. If we want to interpolate, if we didn't put these curly brackets here, it would just put the name, the letter, or the, let's go back, let's refresh the page. Oh, okay, so that's giving me some error having to do with, okay, so it's basically saying random card doesn't exist yet. And let's see, let me see
Someone
why
in
that.
the chat said that you put the card's prop in the root instead of welcome, and now you have it in random card. Will it still work?
Oh
So
yeah,
maybe that's it.
that's totally why. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. That's exactly why. So yeah, cool. So now see just name appears because I didn't put the curly brackets which interpolate JavaScript. So just the word name appears, but if I put the curly brackets here, you see the name of the card will appear. And the magician is the first card in the major arcana, which is the first half, or sort of the first half. It's the first 20 cards or 21 cards, something like that in the deck. So let's continue on with this. What else do we want besides the name? Probably put a P tag with the value. And let's put a P tag with the meaning up. Oh man, I'm about to get super lazy with it. And then, oops. Well, I can do this too. This is good too. And I'll need 3 of those. Then I can basically just say, shortcuts are a coder's best friend. I'm sure those of you who code know that. I'm sure I've done a couple of things so far that made y'all frustrated and like just copy and paste. But yeah, copying and pasting is your best friend. There's no point in just typing everything from scratch, but I also want to make sure I'm explaining everything too. So, okay, I made this basically, oh, of course. So I'm in welcome, and this is not a big deal. So I'm in welcome and I'm just directly displaying the information about the card, right? So here's our card of the day. We could even put like maybe like right here, H2. Let's make this an H2 and make this an H3. That says card of the day. And it then shows the card, right? And a big part of tarot cards is the pictures. I apologize that there are no pictures part of this API already, but I promise you we can add some if we have time at the end. I know that we're already running pretty late, or not late at this point, but we've taken a lot of time. So, okay, let me start coding then. So here is the information about a particular card, right, that we're going to need. So what's great about React and what's great about components is that we can basically abstract this. Instead of only showing on this page, we can make it into a reusable component that we can use multiple different places. So what I'm going to do, so welcome works a lot of the same way. So let's do this. So welcome will receive a random card, right? Or let me go get some other stuff set up first. So tarot card. Welcome right now is basically doing the job of this to just show the information about the card card, right? But what we can do is we can abstract that information into this component and then just reuse it. So I'm gonna literally do that, just to copy all of this stuff and bring it into here. And this will be, instead of random card, it'll be card eventually, even though I haven't set it up yet. So in here, we can deconstruct. Let's assume that we're going to be passing in props called card and deconstruct it from the props, and then can deconstruct the same information from the actual card itself. And then you see I'm getting lots of errors down here. That's okay. So now what we can do is take this div and we can make this the div in here. And let's erase this. We no longer need this, but we can erase this entire div and make this the div that's in here. So now I've abstracted that information. Notice I'm not getting the same errors now. I'm still getting errors, but I'm not getting the same errors now because this card isn't, we're not actually trying to view this page. If I tried to go to the page of one particular card, it'd give me an error. But why do this? Why take all of the information and now our welcome page is blank? Now we can go to welcome and import tarot card, or no strings, from which file are we in right now? We're in the same directory as tarot card. So we can just say from the same directory, tarot card. And now we can say render a tarot card here and pass in as a prop random card, which is the random card. So it's going to be known as a card inside of the component, but outside of the component, we're passing it in as a random card. And it's the first card. We haven't really dealt with the functionality of making it random, but it's just the first card. That's like our placeholder for now. So now if we look back here, our stuff is back. And that's because now it's taking that same component that we'll use over and over again, probably in multiple different places, and it's just abstracting it to another function and making it reusable. So now, whether I'm looking at just one card here on the welcome page, or if I go to Tarot container, which will also need to import Tarot card from the same directory components slash tarot card. Oh, same directory slash tarot card, because I'm in the same directory as I'm in component. So I didn't need to say components. So now I can basically, this will get all of the cards. So this will get cards, because if we go back up to app, I'm passing cards in as cards, and I'm also passing set cards. And I'll show you why I'm doing that in a little while. So really quickly, back in cards, Tarot container, and I'm basically going to say, so we can assume because I did this out here, so because I did this requesting out here, right? I can assume that by the time we get in here, the cards exist. So I don't, that's the reason I kept it out here. At first I said, hey, I don't want this to be out here. I actually want it to be in the components, but then I realized I'll have to now every single component keep doing if loading, if loading, if loading, when I can just now do it this way and keep it simpler for a simple application. But so, okay, now I know the cards will exist, so I don't have to do any extra stuff is what I mean. So now I can just straight up do here, map, or so I can use a function in JavaScript called map. And remember, I'm using my interpolation again to interpolate JavaScript into HTML. So cards.map for each card, I'm going to want to, so this is an arrow function, just like we used in the then, it's just a callback function. So when map is called, it's going to iterate over each card in the array of cards. Because notice, if I go here to the homepage cards, this square bracket here, that means it's the start of an array. And this array contains multiple objects. So it's actually an array, cards. That's why I called it cards, and that's why I'm using it the way that I am. But when I use map, I'm iterating over each card, and map will return a new array with whatever, it will return a new array with whatever logic you have done in here. So in my case, I want to return a new array that will have the tarot card. Each element, instead of being an object like it is here, it will now be transformed into a tarot card. So I'm going to say card is equal to the card of this iteration in map. And now let's go really quickly to one thing I want to do in here, simply because I haven't set up like much styling so that this will look better, is I'll actually make this multiple lines of code and use the return statement. So that's what you have to do if you're using a map statement and it's multiple lines of code. I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to say return a tarot card and a break tag so that it looks a little bit neater. Oh, it's giving me, no, I'm actually not sure. Let's see, did I do the wrong thing? I think it could be because I'm doing, I think maybe.
James wrote can only have one top level element. Is that what the problem is? Like there's more than one top level element?
I don't think so. Top level, because it's just the div, right? I'm returning it inside of a div. So I didn't think that, it's okay. I will get this in there and then I'll worry about that later because I want to fix it with styling anyway. I don't know why that's doing that for me. I wonder if it's something that wrong with the syntax of how I did this, but I'll turn it back into one line because it's neater anyway. And I can get rid of the curly brackets. And this is the parentheses for the end of the map. And now it's going to spit out that stuff. So let's go to that page now. And let's visit Explore, which will now just have all of the tarot cards. So now this is officially the intro to API, because now we have taken the information from some random API that I found on the web, translated it into my own API. And I only did that for the ID so that later we can build a show page and all of this stuff, which we still could have done. That's why they included the value in stuff, so we could still do that. But I just made it easier by using my own backend. But even if you didn't use your own backend, we could use the same. In fact, let me do that. Well, it'll be a little bit different, but this is still cool because this is a big part of dealing with the APIs. So I'm going to put a debugger here, right? And I'm actually going to replace my link with the link from, so that this gives you a little bit more of an idea how you would do it if you were just doing this without my API, but with the link that I originally gave you. So I'm going to go to where that link is, which for me is right here. And I will go back here to the front end, which, trust me, is one of the more complicated things about working with this stuff, moving between the front end and back end in your Visual Studio Code, like not getting flustered, but you get used to it. So back here, I'm gonna, instead of using that link, I'm gonna use this one, which already has the quotation marks. Okay, now I'm hitting a debugger this time because I'm probably gonna get errors if I didn't, but let's look at cards data, because it actually might be exactly what I need. You guys might not have to change anything, but we're checking just in case. Because sometimes you'll see that responses will come with more than just what you need in it. Like maybe it'll have like another nested hash that says results, and that's where your cards are. So you always want to check that. So I put the debugger here so I can make sure that I'm still getting that. Oh, it's using old code, by the way. I thought so. Okay, so now you see that it's sending cards data instead of cards data just directly being the array that we could just call set data on or set cards on. It's another object with the array nested inside. So that's one thing that you really want to make sure with when you're using APIs, that you're actually accessing the correct API that you think. So the way that I can fix this is by unpacking this and only using deconstruction again, and only deconstructing cards from here. So I only want cards out of here, and I need to put my parentheses around this since I'm using deconstruction. And then it's not my favorite thing to do because I'm kind of like conflicting with this and this, but it works. I could also just do cards data in order to avoid that. And by that, I mean, I have a variable, the state variable already called cards, even though this was a local variable and it shouldn't have conflicted, it's just prone to bugs. So I'm gonna not, so cards data dot cards is what I'm gonna do instead. So now I'm doing the same thing. So press play, refresh the page, press play again, and you see the same thing is appearing, except with the other link. Because the only thing that's different is that mine has an actual field called ID, but since I'm never using the ID yet, it doesn't matter. So that's kind of how it's working. That's how an API in general works. Now, really quick, Tiffany, how much time do we have left?
We're already over time, but if you need to keep going, go ahead.
I don't need to. I'm down to continue going just because I wanted to show.
Yeah, I'm here and we have a decent amount of people still here. So if you want to keep going, feel free. And for those of you who have to hop, don't worry, I will get the full clip over to you guys within 48 hours.
Awesome. So, okay.
There was one question in the Q&A and I've kind of left it for a little while, but can you explain why you use Rails with React?
Rails is really easy to get up and started. Like it's super fast. Like if you ever get a chance to study a little bit of Rails, you'll see that you're up and running in like seconds. So like to make this backend that I made, it maybe took me overall like an hour. And that's even if I ran into issues. And that's because Rails is really good at just getting up and running. It's really simple to use.
Perfect.
So that's
All
why
right.
I use Rails.
Yeah, you can, if people do want to connect on LinkedIn, feel free to put your information in the chat.
And
But I'll let you continue on, Matthew. Go ahead.
Awesome. Let me throw my LinkedIn link in the chat as well, so you guys can have that before I get too far along. And two things that I want to maybe implement really quick for those of you who are interested. Let's see, I think I'll do this thing first because it might be, I think, a little bit more interesting. So, okay, let's make our route to see one particular card, right? So the way that we would do that is, let's essentially do something like this. Tarot card. That's what's going to be rendered by one particular. So we're just going to render, we're going to make it super simple, even though we could do something maybe more complicated than just this. In fact, I will do that. I will make another component called Tarot Show, which will show one card. So this is more of like a stylist or, you know, just organizational thing. So Tarot Show. And then once I get the show page up and running, I will add one last feature to add a picture to the cards. And that's kind of just something that's super interesting and useful to be able to do, add media files. So I'll do that really quick. And then we'll stop there because there's infinite things that I could do, of course, but let's go. Tarot Show will be a component. Let's create that new file, tarot show.jsx. And let's use our scaffold. And what this is going to be is, this is essentially, we really don't need this. We really just, okay, this is fine. This is fine. Okay. So we're going to say in H1, let's put, so this is going to, we're going to pass in a particular, or we're going to pass in all the cards, right? So we're going to pass in cards. We're going to pass in all the cards from up above. Let's go back and do that. So Tarot Show will have cards, and then it'll be equal to cards from this. And we will also, do we need set cards? I don't think we need set cards. We actually didn't need set cards here either. So I'll erase it, but I won't really do anything in there from now on. So cards will be all of the cards. And what we're going to need to do is use another hook called use params. And we're going to need to put curly brackets on because that's only one part of the entire file that is React, excuse me. So now I can do this. I can say const ID is equal to use param. So whatever number I type in to my address in the place of that :ID will be what gets to return here. You can also do this thing called routing the router props to each of your components, and that'll also be an easy way to do this. But I'm just going to use params because I'm using hooks. So, okay, that ID, and now I'm going to use effect too. I'm going to use effect, another one of the hooks that I used before. So use effect is going to now be run when this component first loads one time. And I'm going to do that by giving it the callback function and also an empty array of dependencies, meaning only one time do this. So when the program first loads, I want you to take cards. So I want you to make const card be equal to cards dot filter. And I want only the card whose ID is equal to 3 equal signs in JavaScript. Whose card.id is equal to the ID that's being passed into the, so this is how we're dictating like which card is going to show up. And now we can, this will filter the card, and I'm going to put a debugger here just so we can see what's being returned, because filter will return an array. And Tarot Show is not defined. Let's see, that's because I probably didn't import it in here. So import Tarot Show, and I named it show, just like if you saw in the back end, I called the route that corresponded with one card, the show route. That's just a convention. So tarot show from components, tarot show, and great. So now that loads. So now, okay, now in order to trigger that debugger, I'm gonna have to try to visit the page of one card. So it's basically saying object is not a function. I think it's talking about the fact that I use params here. Oh yeah, like how do I do, I don't think that I'm doing anything necessarily wrong here, but I don't know why it's telling me this. So it's saying object is not a function, basically saying use params. I can't call it like a function because it's an object, but that's not true. Oh, that's because I'm calling use params doesn't come from React, just like use effect. Use effect comes from React, but use params actually comes from React router DOM. So use params from React router DOM. And now that should hit our debugger. So let's do this once more. Undefined, cannot read properties of undefined request content. Oops, I don't know what that's talking about. Let's see, did I pass cards down into tarot show? Yes.
This is also the life of a coder. I just want to put that out there as well.
Absolutely. Lots of errors. I'm surprised I haven't run into more by now. But let's see, what's it basically saying? Oh, that makes sense. Okay. Show card. Let's just rename that as that and try this again. This is weird. This is definitely one that I'm not used to or that I wasn't expecting to run into. Let's see. If I go here, here, that is another error that I'm gonna have to, it's not an error, but I'm gonna have to deal with it at some point. So I'm actually a little stumped why this is happening.
Selena asked, are you using your API or the public one?
Good. I'm using the pub. Thank you. Thank you. Who was that?
That was Galena. Good catch.
You. Yes, that's exactly what that is. Because the ID doesn't exist in there, hence why I chose my API to use instead of the other one, because the ID doesn't technically exist in that one. So let me put my API back. Awesome, good spot, because that was definitely throwing me for a loop. I wasn't sure exactly which direction they head in from there after that. Okay, cool.
That's why also pair programming is helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. So cannot read properties of undefined, reading 0. That's because, okay, that's weird. That's actually happening because when this re-renders, oh, that's because of this. That's because when I was accessing the other set of data, it was a little bit differently. So now, finally, moment of truth. Is my debugger still here? Let me go back into here, tarot show. And no, my debugger's gone. So back into here, debugger. And now I hit it. So yeah, long story short, it was because of the lack, I wasn't using. Okay, so it's saying that it can't find a card by that ID. Okay, what I would like to do is look a little bit further into this, because show card. So, okay, what I can do now, I can also look, since I'm in the debugger already, I can look at ID. And that's why, because ID is returning a string, and it's actually a number. So what I can do is just do this, number, so I can turn that string into a number. And that's how the debugger works. It just allows you to sort of see really quickly how things are working. And okay, I didn't even use it to look at which card was there. So it's an array with one card in it, right? Because there's only one card that matches that card. That's why we use it as the ID. So what we want to do is use another state variable. We want to use state inside of here. And we want to say, use state and const state or const card, or I guess, what do we want to call this? let's call it current card, just so we make sure we're not conflicting with anything here. So set current card, it's going to be a callback function because I have card in here. It's not going to conflict with each other, just to make it easy, more readable, just preference. I could have really used card and it wouldn't have conflicted, but just let's keep things nice and standard. So after I find the card, so show card is going to be the only card that's returned by this. So I can say 0 here. And this is still a little sloppy because what if nothing's returned by this, which should never happen, but just keep that in mind when you're coding. You want to account for things like that, and it's just going to make your code look a little bit better. Some things are unnecessary, but something like that might be a little further down. So I'm going to say set current card to be show card, which is going to be the one card that matched. And I never finished this, equals use state. Oops, I keep doing that. State. And it's going to just be an object. Initialized as just an object. Then I'm going to say set current card. And let's set current card to just be everything that's in show card. Be non-destructive here. So there we go. That should be good. Now, the card in question, so now I can basically render tarot card, import tarot card from the same directory, tarot card, and I can now render it here. So that's how that's working. And there's one last thing that we will do, and I don't think that I'll run into many errors because I just did it in preparation for this, so I should be able to do it pretty quickly and get you guys out of here. But maybe you'll want to see it later on video. That's why I'm going to continue to do it. So current card is going to be what's passed in. Okay, so now let's just go visit that page and also make a link for it. Probably. Oh, geez. Okay. So it's basically, that's okay. That's just saying that show card, it's returning. What we could do to check this is really quickly.
Stanley says check line 6, and James says no need to spread show card. Is there?
Not really. You'll just see that when you're dealing with React a lot, you will do that. You'll use the spread, and I think it's to be non-destructive or something like that. It's something along those lines. But you'll see that super often because you don't want to like change the state of this or something like that, something along those lines. And show card is going to be an object, so we should be able to.
But James says, I think that it breaks in this case.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that's happening. I have no clue why that's happening. Maybe that's just how it works when you're using hooks, the set current card hook. But yeah, that's okay. Yeah, you're right. I was just able to, even though I'm still, yeah, that's still just going off of older code. Just gotta refresh the page. So now
Carmen wants to know, how do you keep this all together in your brain head? Smiley face.
I literally do this like all the time. Like you will when you're coding, if you're coding often, you'll likely be doing this super often. And that's in the H1. I didn't mean to do that. That's why everything's big like that. But you'll be doing all of this stuff super often. And so this stuff that I've shown you right now, it's a lot of stuff that you could kind of like technically learn on your own, I guess, or learn from just like reading the docs for React, like few weeks, But this last thing that I want to show you guys, it's something important or something helpful when it comes to actually editing your APIs. And we'll do it in a very simple way. So here's a card, right? And we have the card's ID inside of here, we have the card's ID based on this param, or we can look at current card.id. So we're going to do something really cool, really quick. So in our back end, I'm going to do something. I'm going to go in here in my other tab, and I'm going to run Rails active, or well, I'll show you guys. This is where I'm getting this information, and essentially I just want the commandment to install it. So that's going to be this one, bin Rails active storage install. Then we're going to go here, install that. And this is the way that you can handle files in your application. So just to make this a little prettier, we're going to add something to our table. So here in the schema, we have our table that has the cards. The cards, oh, it already has it. Cool, I've already added it because I probably wanted to do it before or did it before. Yeah, I did it before actually, just doing it a different way. So now I'm going to run Rails S again, and I'm gonna go here. And this is definitely like more supplemental, like for you guys who are a little familiar with backend processes. Not going to go super deep into detail, but just in case you wanted to follow this and just do it, this is basically how it's done from the start. If you just assume that you already have a model in here, has one attached image, let's say image, right? This has one attached image. And now what we can do is, let's say that we have an update here, right? And this is the route that will deal with updating a card. So what we can do here, and I'm going to put a binding pry here, which is the equivalent of a debugger, but in Rails. So I'll quickly build a function that will allow us to add an image to any of these given cards. And then it will display that image in the future. When we are looking at the show page or whatever for our tarot card, it'll display this image. And you can add images as you need to or as you want to. So the way that we'll do that is we will go into our front end again. And first what we need to do is, and let me close my back end so it doesn't get in my way. So the front end, and we're going to do this from Tarot Show. And what we're going to do is we're going to do something like this. So show card, right now it has the card in it, right? And if we were to do something like this, current card dot image URL, if I go to the API right here, then you see that the image URL is null. So I can basically ask, does the image URL exist? I can use a ternary operator, and I could say, does the image URL exist? If it does, then we need to display the image. So display that card's image. So if an image exists on this card, display the card's image, which will be, you can find that using current card dot image URL as the source for this image. And let's, to make it just more readable, really quickly put in some dimensions so that it's not filling up the whole page. Height equals 300 pixels. Okay, so there we go. We have that if the image URL exists, then we're going to show the image. Else, if the image URL does not exist, this is where we're going to put our other condition, and our other condition will be the important part, because it's going to say, we're going to say, if the image doesn't exist, put a little tiny form here. And in this form, we're going to put an input, and its type is going to be a file, and its name is going to be file. And that's that. So, and then let's make a button that will be able to submit this page. And let's call it add image. So now let's go back and let's put a break tag here, because it's probably going to want it just to keep it looking nice. So back here in our React app, you see that this card's image is nil. So it's showing us this link. If the image wasn't nil, then it would show us just the image. So let's get this working.
There's
now.
one quick question. Mert wants to know, why is the showing card ID :2? Is that because it's the current card?
-2, ID
Yeah,
colon.
when you go to
Oh,
it, it's like, it's card 2. I guess.
yeah. And that's when it comes to the dynamic routes, because I have the colon ID there, it will take whatever number I put here. And when I call this function use params, it's going to look in the params hash for something with the ID of, for the key of ID. And now I'm getting the card from the deck of cards that matches that ID. So filter is going to return an array, and I'm returning the only card in that array because that's the card, because the ID is unique and it should only have one card. And that's how I'm setting the card of this particular component.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sweet. So that's that. Now, when we change this, so on change. So when this file, so I'm going to need to do something in here, const set. I'm going to need to make another state variable. This is going to be called file. And it's going to have a callback of set file, use state. And the file is just going to be initialized to null. Let's not try to give it a default object. That won't make sense. So now when we call this function, it's going to take the event. And we really don't need the event in the situation. But really what we want to do is set file to be e.target.files at 0, I believe. So how can we check this? I guess what we can do to check this, I'm trying to think of the best way to check this. I guess, because it's in the state, I could use like some sort of tools in my developers tools to sort of check it. But okay, what I can do is instead, I can just do this. Instead of doing all of that just yet, I can just say console.log and then pass in e.target.files at 0. And this might not like that being there, or it might just be that there's an extra parentheses here, possibly. Is that it? Yep. Okay. So now when I choose the image, it should log into here, and that'll be a way that I can know for sure that it's the right image. So let me go to downloads, documents. Here's a whole bunch of pictures that I have from recently. Okay, cool. That's the file. That's the file that we're looking for. Awesome. So now we can set the state with that. So I can put basically what I had before back here, where I'm setting file to be that file. Now, when I submit this form, so on submit, it's just another event handler that we can put on a form to tell when you submitted it. We can now call handle submit. And we're putting this in here because it's just probably easier for now. Maybe another function or another component would need to call handle submit, and we can abstract it to the app component. But we won't do that just now. Handle submit. And that's going to be a function that will now take, first we have to prevent the default action. So when a form is submitted, the default action is to want to go to another page. Is to want to submit the form to some other page. We're going to prevent that happening. And we're actually just going to do this. Form data is equal to, all right, and of course, let me declare this as a variable. Let form data equal new form data object. So this is the tricky part when it comes to file upload, knowing how to do this part when it comes to Rails API. So form data object will allow us to put this file inside of the form data object. And so it's going to take the key that I want to store it in. And I think that's going to be called file. And I want that to be the file. And I believe that that's how that worked. Really quick, so I don't waste. That's okay. That's down. Oh, that's strange. E doesn't exist. E is not defined in Taro show. I'm actually not sure. Oh, yeah, I'm actually not sure why that's happening. Any of you helpers can help me out here because I'm actually not seeing what's going on. I could just do something like
James
this.
says needs to be declared as a param in function definition. Felix says you should pass E to handles submit.
Oh, yes, that's where that's coming from. Awesome. Thank you. That's exactly where that's
I
coming
just want to say this chat is so friendly and so helpful. This
Yeah,
is
you
what
guys
exactly what we
are
love in our
awesome.
community. Thank you, all of you.
Yeah, exactly. You guys are killing it. Like, definitely. I thought that I would be coming in like teaching like very beginners, and maybe some of you guys are, but I didn't expect to have as many of you helping me, which is awesome. So awesome. That's exactly what's wrong there. I'm not passing in E to handle submit, and I was trying to use it on line 17. I would have known that if I just looked at the line that the error was occurring on. But yeah, you guys totally understand that probably, right? So form data object. Anyone know the argument for append? I believe that it's going to be the name and value. Cool. I'm not going to worry too much about that. This is the name, and this is the value, and this is storing as a basically like an object that can store a blob, a file. So now here's our handy dandy fetch request again. So what we're going to do is we're just going to basically make the fetch request and go from there. There might be some things that we want to do as a good practice, but since we're running so over, let's just definitely get this done. So cards so we're going to want to send a update request or a patch request to our database, telling it to update this particular card. So the way that we're going to do that is by interpolating the ID of the card that we're updating. So current cards ID, that's the wrong symbol. That's for Ruby. This is for our JavaScript. Now we're going to interpolate current card. So now it knows which card to make the request to. And the second argument for fetch, when you're making anything other than a GET request, fetch will need like more stuff, more information about your request. So we're going to tell it that we're making a patch request. The method is patch, meaning we're going to update a particular card. Oops. And then we're going to say simply that the body is form data. It should be as simple. Usually fetch requests are a little bit more complicated than this, but because we are sending a form data object, it's making it a little bit different. So we can expect now that when we upload a file and press submit, that we will hit a binding pry in the back end, and the back end will then come back here, and binding pry, like I said, is like the debugger of a backend process. So we should hit that, and then we'll connect the dots, and then we'll be done. So let's go to React, our React application. Let's go here to that. Let's hit submit. And it's not, okay, that's probably because I said current card and not current card ID. So the error that I'm getting is cannot do this with an object. That's because I probably threw the whole object in there. And I wouldn't be surprised if I looked in the comments and one of you had already told me. So let's go back here, and instead of current card.id. So let's send that again. And we hit our binding pry back here. So now here's the fun part. Params will have the file in it, right? So params file contains the file. Now let's go over here to cards controller. And this is where the magic happens with active storage and what we did with active storage. Because now we can say if we can do this, or we can still do basically what's happening right now. Okay, so if params at the key of file. So if we have a file that we would like to, and I put parentheses around it, even though we're in Ruby and we don't need parentheses there. So if params at file exists, so I can put my double bangs here to turn it into a Boolean expression, even though Rails definitely doesn't care about that, even though JavaScript probably doesn't either. But so I'll put it there just in case. If the file exists, then what we want to do is, remember, you may not be able to see it, but up here I'm saying before these actions, set the card. So look in the params, get the ID of the card that I'm looking for and set it as this instance variable at card. So that's how I'm getting the card that I want to work with. In fact, if I type in at card here, it'll return the card, right? So if the params have a file in it, what I'm going to want to do is say at card dot image dot attach. And then I'm going to attach params at the key of file. So the file that I'm sending through the params, attach it. So now I'm going to put a binding pry here, just to kind of break it up just a little bit, break up the magic just a little bit so that it's understandable. So start my server again. Oops. Let me try another file. Let's submit. Hits the binding pry again, even though it doesn't look like it. And that's because it worked. Active storage is doing some extra stuff. Analyze blob or analyze job, but they are dealing with blobs. As you can see, active storage blobs and all of this stuff. It's basically what active storage is doing in order to save the file to your object. So now I can type in card dot image, and you see it now returns a record. And now here's the cool thing: card dot image dot blob. And we get the entry in the database that is the representation of the file .url. That doesn't work because I'm not using a service. So the next step from what we're doing now, right now we're storing this stuff in our local storage. So if you're using this application on my computer, it will work and it'll show all the images. But what if you want other people to use your application? You would make what's called an Amazon Web Services S3 bucket, something like that. There are lots of different options, but that's what I would do normally. And that's why I would use this particular way of getting the URL. But because I'm not using that, I'm going to actually do something along the lines of this. So I'm going to replace, so now that since I know that the image is attached, I can just do this simply: card.image URL is equal to the URL for, and this is how I'm going to get the image, the link to an image that's on my drive. This will change slightly once we outsource to Amazon S3 bucket. But okay, let me put this up here too, so that it doesn't try to happen if there's no file. So URL for, and then I'm going to tell it card.image. And that's it. I'm going to say the image that's attached to this file, let's make a URL for it and store it in the URL, image URL attribute of a card. And now I'm updating the card, which saves my changes. And then it's sending the information back. So let me exit completely out. Do Rails S again. Now let me go back here. I'm going to have to do it one last time. So let's go here. Thinker.
Dante wants to know, so you'll use Amazon S3 bucket if you want millions of people using your app?
Not millions of people necessarily, but anyone other than you on your computer. That's kind of the idea there. Anyone other than, like, the only way that you'd have access to these images that I'm about to show are if you are using my computer, my local machine, because that's where the links are leading to my local machine. But when you put it in the bucket, it makes it to where your links are accessible from anyone. So you might run into errors trying to pull images from your local drive. Now this says BAT request. What's it saying related to this? Server responded with a 400, and I can look at my API to kind of get an idea of what was. So it's saying param is missing, and that's because of just a typo. So let me go back to cards controller, wherever I put that. And param is missing. It's looking for card. Oh, so geez, this is, okay, so this is because right now I'm saying card params requires the key of card first. And then So I can technically, to get rid of this error, I can just get rid of this for now. And that'll probably mostly work. I might still have to maybe just get rid of strong params in general. Even though that might mess up some of my other routes, but this is just for demonstrating this particular feature. So bam, that worked. I believe that worked. I should have gotten a 200. Okay, so this is my response right here. It's responded with 200. Okay, so now let's do this. Let's go to word of the day. And darn, I didn't pay attention to which. Okay, let me go back. So card 4 should have an image attached to it now. And there we go. And it's being weird. Yeah, there we go. It just took a second to load. But now I have sent the image to the backend, saved it to the entry in the database. And now that this card has an image, because it has an image, and I set up the ternary right here that says if the current card has an image, then show the image, and else show the form to submit an image. Now, if I go to the next card, it doesn't. Now, I do that so that if we want, we can now just update, now add tarot pictures to here. And you see it takes a second to load. That's just generally how images and files and stuff are, and especially because this is probably pretty high resolution, I think, maybe. But that's it. That is it, guys. That was even a little bit of backend stuff, but that is generally how we use APIs. We went through how to, we didn't create necessarily anything in our API because it was kind of already pre-created, but we did throw in updating an API to the mix and adding an image and just generally using the data from the API to make something constructive. So you can imagine, I can't do it this time, of course, because we just don't have time, but the next thing that I would probably go about doing is making a filter here where I can filter by a particular, some particular value, of some sort. I see some of them just say value, so there's probably a bug, but that's generally it. That's how you use APIs. Usually you're using fetch to make requests to the API, turning them into state objects and displaying them in the browser somehow. So that is a really quick rundown.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I think that was such a thorough rundown. We greatly appreciate you going through that. And I greatly appreciate this group of people who, one, helped you, but helped each other and stayed kind. It's always what we want in these sorts of events. Galena just asked a question. She said, will you push this code to
Absolutely.
GitHub so that they can go back to? And I think that's a great question.
I can do that right away, and I can put it in the chat for you before we even leave.
Oh, that's perfect. And just do me a favor, Matthew, when you go to the chat, just put to everyone and not just hosting panelists. I've been reposting.
Okay.
Stuff.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, Matthew, people are very happy and with your teaching today. So I also want to say thank you for taking time out of your evening to teach this group of folks, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely, guys. It was absolutely no problem. I love coding. I know a lot of you who are, even if you're just getting into it and you're starting to get that excitement about it, it never really goes away because you never really stop learning things, which is one of the cool things. The better you are at learning stuff, the more you get paid in this job. Like literally the salaries go really high. So if you love learning, you love computers, and you just like, this kind of thing, then
and problem solving, right? Because I mean, so many times you ran into bugs and you didn't get flustered, you just kind of kept going with it. And I think that is exactly the sort of thing that you need in this profession.
Absolutely.
If you haven't put it in the chat yet, I can also use it for the follow-up email as well. So no stress.
Yeah, that'll work too. It'll be done pushing in just a second, I guess.
We can hold off if it's pushing. Yeah, does anyone have questions? I know we went long, and while we wait for the code to render, does anyone have any questions? For email, if you guys are interested, I highly suggest you can reach out to Matthew via his LinkedIn, so his work inbox doesn't get too full, but feel free to
Absolutely.
if you have questions or you just want to, oh, thank you, Matthew. You just want to, pick his brain. I'm sure Matthew will be more than willing to help. And the link is here. And don't worry, I will also save this and put it in
awesome
in our follow-up email. All right. Cheers. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Thanks again, Matthew. This has been so helpful.
Thank you guys so much. Y'all were so great. Y'all were such a great audience.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And have a great evening. And we'll hope to see you at the next event. Cheers.
Bye.